The US brokered agreement between Israel and Lebanon has sparked concerns that it will throw Lebanon back into a civil war. Signed in Washington, the framework agreement is intended to pave the way for greater stability and reduce tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border. However, the deal is also seen in contrast to the understandings reached between the United States and Iran during talks in Switzerland. Iran managed to wrap the situation in Lebanon into its negotiations with the United States. A separate memorandum of understanding reportedly called for the parties to observe a ceasefire in Lebanon and uphold the country's territorial integrity. Now, the memorandum also proposed the creation of a joint deconfliction mechanism involving Lebanon to help monitor and preserve the ceasefire. According to Axios, the proposal surprised both Israeli and Lebanese officials, who viewed it as potentially strengthening Hezbollah and legitimizing Iran's influence in Lebanon. The developments come as Israeli and Lebanese negotiators prepared for a key round of talks in Washington. Axios reported that negotiators worked on 3 documents: a framework agreement, a security annex, and an agreement outlining an initial Israeli withdrawal from 2 pilot zones to be replaced by the Lebanese armed forces. Now, the report said that disagreements persisted for 3 days, particularly over terms and locations of Israeli withdrawal during that period. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio held 8 phone calls with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun in an effort to bridge the differences. According to Axios, Washington also requested 2 changes to the draft agreement to help secure the deal, including an Israeli withdrawal from a village in southern Lebanon, currently under Israeli control, and an explicit commitment that the move would mark the beginning of a broader Israeli redeployment from Lebanon. A source cited in the report said that there wasn't a lot of trust between Israel and Lebanon, but eventually both parties understood that they needed to get a deal in order to keep control of the process and not allow Iran in Lebanon. The agreement increased tensions in Lebanon, with Hezbollah rejecting this framework. They were not included in the talks and they didn't agree to it either. The agreement linked Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon to Hezbollah's disarmament. Now, the group's chief, Naim Qasim, said that his group will keep fighting until Israel is forced out of Lebanon. Peace remained elusive in Lebanon, and it still does even now. State-run National News Agency reported multiple explosions, including in the southern city of Nabateh on Sunday. In one of the strikes, Israel said that it destroyed an extensive tunnel network in the area which was used by Hezbollah. The Iran-backed group called the attacks a blatant violation of the ceasefire, adding that it is monitoring and even tracking these violations and reserves its right to defend its homeland and people. All right, joining me on the broadcast on Point Counterpoint, Alex Treman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate. Alex, thanks so much for making time for us. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Let's start right off. The conflict and all the hostilities as they still continue, agreement over agreement over agreement, ceasefire 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and still the fighting continues. Does this have all the makings of a civil war yet again in Lebanon?
Well, the reason why you have these continuous agreements and you have the threat of a civil war is because you have a major terror organization, Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy, which has destabilized Lebanon and threatened its sovereignty at the same time while attacking Israel, making Israel want to defeat that terror organization. But this is an attempt by Lebanon to announce to the world that Iran will not be sovereign in its country, and actually grants permission for the first time for Israel to be operating there legally to remove the threat of Hezbollah.
Let me, I hear your point, Alex. Let me introduce a counter to this. Just giving a very quick brief into events which took place years ago, decades ago rather. The previous time there was a civil war in Lebanon when it started in 1975, ended in 1990. During that period of time, 1978 is when Israel invaded Lebanon. They entered. 1982, again there was an entry, and they stayed there till the year 2000, going as far as the Beaufort Fort. As of now, you see that if there is a civil war, it gives enough reason for Israel to continue with their incursion into Lebanon. That's the counter argument that comes forward. How do you respond to that?
Well, Israel doesn't have any territorial claims or desires inside Lebanon. It wants there to be a secure border with Lebanon immediately to its north, without any reason not to have commercial agreements or Israelis to be able to go in and out of Lebanon on a just a commercial basis. But the problem is that Iran has used Lebanon as a staging ground for attacks against Israel. So it has nothing to do with there being a civil war or a threat of a civil war in Lebanon. It has to do with the fact that another country across the region, which has also sent ballistic missiles to Israel, is using Lebanon as a staging ground for Israeli attacks. And Israel's, at this point, its military doctrine has changed, and it's not going to accept that.
Alex, the claim that Israel has no interest in Lebanon and the only interest is to defend itself. There are, and I'm making it very clear, this is not official, but then there's talk of a greater Israel, when that includes a certain sense and certain aspect of Lebanon. Is that a wide-ranging sentiment in Israel?
It's not a wide-ranging sentiment among the majority of Israelis. There's no agenda inside Israel, specifically not within this current Israeli government, to be expanding Israel beyond the Jordan River, beyond the Lebanese border. But at the same time, Israel will not allow those areas that are immediately adjacent to Israel to be used by terror organizations to destabilize its border. So, I think that Israel is just really looking for quiet and will respond to quiet with quiet.
All right. And at this point, Hezbollah, they are not happy with this framework agreement which has been signed. They're not happy without the fact that the Lebanese armed forces need to take control near the southern Litani River in southern Lebanon. And is there a sense that you get that Hezbollah will vacate, giving space to the Lebanese armed forces to take control in this region? Because there is a growing sentiment that they are not happy, and that is even leading to protests as far as the capital in Beirut, and that can easily spiral across the country, and that is where the sense of a civil war is erupting from. Will they give way to the Lebanese armed forces?
I think for Israel, the major concern is that they will infiltrate the Lebanese armed forces, that the Lebanese armed forces are not stronger than Hezbollah, and that there's a much greater risk, actually, of Hezbollah just donning Lebanese armed forces uniforms and returning to operate in southern Lebanon under the guise of being part of the Lebanese army. I don't really see right now the Lebanese army with the capacity to defeat Hezbollah in the country. I think it's very well understood that the only force in the Middle East that can sufficiently defeat Hezbollah would be the state of Israel. This ceasefire agreement actually prevents Israel from further doing that.
Alex, and this is what the Israeli Prime Minister had also said, there was an open invitation to Lebanese people, because Israel draws a distinction between Hezbollah and the Lebanese citizens. They've even invited Lebanon to be and stand with Israel as they fight against Hezbollah. But when you look at the Lebanese side, the Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, he rejected this trilateral framework deal between Lebanon, Israel and the US, calling it a dictated deal that fails to protect Lebanon's rights. Is there a consolidated thought of the Lebanese people when clearly the Lebanese Parliament Speaker himself is not in favor of this agreement?
Well, you have basically three major factions inside Lebanon. You have the Shiite faction, which generally supports Hezbollah. The Iranians also are Shiites. You have a Sunni faction, which generally rejects Hezbollah. And then you have a Christian faction, which is about a third of the country, including the president, WION, who thoroughly reject Hezbollah and believe that Hezbollah has really ruined their country. So you do have a major faction in there that does support Hezbollah, but you also have a majority that is really against Hezbollah and would just like to see that country be rehabilitated economically.
When the Lebanese people, or the Lebanese country and the country of Lebanon and its entire framework, there are fractures, or I would say there are factions, let's put it that way. When Hezbollah is one side of it, those who sympathize with Hezbollah are one side of it, the Sunni faction is a different side of it, and those who would be willing to, like the president himself, that's a different side of it. In this circumstance, and Israel wanting to defend itself, as you say, is there any source which would give one the impression that there can be peace in this region, because it has been decades of war?
Yeah, I think as long as you see that the terrorist organizations are allowed to survive and reconstitute and thrive, there is going to be always the threat of emerging war. I mean, the danger here is that Hezbollah accepts the terms of the ceasefire agreement and uses the time in order to reconstitute itself and to wait until maybe there's a different president in the United States, a more isolationist president or a weaker president, and then decides to attack later on. I think as long as you have terror organizations that are committed in their charters to Israel's destruction, that there's going to be the consistent threat of war and Israeli retaliation.
Alex, earlier on you had mentioned that at least not in this government, they do not wish to have any part in Lebanon. But when the security minister himself says for every mother, Israeli mother, 1,000 Lebanese mothers must cry, and it's out there, and it must be burnt. Those kind of statements, this is quote unquote. How do you read that and then also say that Israel is not looking to go further into a war with Hezbollah or Lebanon?
Well, I think it's important always to understand that there's different audiences. Okay, number one, you have an audience at home. Israel's going to an election, and these same politicians need to face their own electorate, and their electorate wants them to be tough. A second audience, of course, are the actors on the other side of the border, and you have to speak in the Middle East the language of your enemies for them to understand that you want to be strong and you will not be weak. Now, a lot of times these messages that are for the Israeli electorate or for Hezbollah or the enemies of the Jewish people don't really align with what people in the Western world or in other countries around the world want to hear. That's definitely unfortunate. It's something that Israelis grapple with when they're making these statements. But I think that the urgency of an upcoming election here and the speaking to the enemies are at this point take priority over what the rest of the world, and particularly in the West, want to hear.
Let me also provide a certain thought which widely it has been discussed, that to continue in the hot seat, it's important that the war continues. That's for the Israeli Prime Minister. And to continue in the hot seat for the US President, it's important that the war stops. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think for Netanyahu, it's important that he gets a victory, right? So if he gets a ceasefire agreement now that holds with a weakened Hezbollah, and Iran is continue to be weakened and is on the threat of even a regime collapse, this can be very good for Netanyahu. But if the electorate sees that he didn't go all the way and finish the war, this could harm him at the electorate. So certainly, Trump wanted to get to an agreement in order to deal with his own midterm election issues. Netanyahu definitely needs to show his populace that he succeeded in being a successful wartime prime minister.
With so many factions in place, Alex, is there any clear victory to a war when clearly you're dealing with non-state actors?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point, that these are non-state actors that have destabilized countries. And you just see how badly Iran has destabilized the entirety of the Middle East with these non-state actors in Iraq with Kataib Hezbollah, in Syria when Bashar Assad was there, in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Gaza with Hamas, in Yemen with the Houthis. This has been the strategy of Iran to create a regional hegemony and create a ring of fire around Israel. And it forces Israel into a very difficult situation because it has to fight the terror organizations while at the same time to recognize the sovereignty of governments that really don't have the power to take care of their own domestic issues and kick those terror
But is there a victory? But can you define a victory in this circumstance? I understand this, but is there a victory circumstance?
Yeah. I think that Israelis are getting used to the idea that they will have to continue to fight for their survival as long as these circumstances remain. And right now we're looking not only at this Shiite crescent of Iran, but we're also looking at the threat of Turkey, which continues to call for the extermination of Israel, Egypt, which has a significant military force to its south, as well as Qatar, which can bankroll the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood all around the region. So Israel is in a very, very complicated situation in a dangerous neighborhood, but is proving that it is going to survive in this neighborhood by attacking those forces, whether they be state forces like Iran or non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas.
Alex Trayman, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining me here. There will be more to discuss. Look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks for having me.